Hi everyone, this is Dr. Stefan. Welcome to another quick video. In this one, I'd just like to answer a comment about asthma. So here it goes. My son has asthma. Can you use a pulse oximeter to measure asthma? My son has had a bad asthma attack this weekend while struggling from a viral infection. So this is a good comment, I think, because a lot of people think that those little oxygen probes that you put on your finger are fantastic for measuring a lot of things while you're having a respiratory condition. It's important to know what they do. Now, in the case of asthma, they may or may not be helpful. The problem is sometimes your oxygen levels, the ones that you measure with the pulse oximeter, may not actually coincide with the perceived severity of your asthma attack. So you might actually feel like you are really struggling to breathe. You're really bad. You're wheezing, your chest is tight, you can find it hard to breathe, to take your inhalers, to cut the attack, but your oxygen levels may still be normal. Of course, your pulse rate may go up quite a bit during an asthma attack because you are panicking, you are not breathing well. So in that sense, it may give you some numbers that you can look at, but to be honest, the main indicator that your asthma attack is really going not in the right direction is that you're unable to stop it by using your inhalers. You're unable to take your inhalers to cut the asthma attack. You may need to use a spacer sometimes to just like synchronize your breathing because you're panting, you're breathing so quickly. And your chest is really tight, you feel really unwell, you're sweating, you know, it's a bad situation. If you are in that scenario, to be honest, I would be more guided by the symptoms than by what's going on with your oxygen. And if you are feeling really unwell with an asthma attack, and if you cannot manage at home, I do urge you to think about going to the emergency room. Asthma attacks can sometimes be very terrifying, very bad, and sometimes just going in for an emergency treatment, if that's the case, is probably the right thing to do. Even though a lot of people may avoid going to the emergency room because of long queues, waiting times, etc. It all depends on your situation, and of course you would use common sense, but think about your health in the first instance. Now, if you've had a history of asthma that was really bad, so you've had potentially asthma attacks that were life-threatening in the past, you had to go into an intensive care unit because of your asthma, I would have a much lower threshold to recommend going in for emergency treatment. If that's not the case, if usually your asthma attacks do behave, let's say, and you take your inhalers, you take a couple of puffs of your rescue inhaler, such as a salbutamol inhaler, blue inhaler, Ventolin inhaler, maybe you need to use a spacer to do that because you are breathing really quickly, so you can't really synchronize your inhaler trigger, your inhaler technique with breathing in. If that's the case, you know, you might use a spacer. So these are these large little devices in which you connect the puffer to one end, you trigger the release of the medication within the spacer, and then you slowly breathe it in. That can help. So obviously that can help you get in the medication in during an asthma attack. Another option would be, but this is again talking to your own doctor, if you need to use a nebulizer, so you may sometimes need to have a nebulizer during asthma attacks, because you can then just put the little mask on, turn on the nebulizer, put the little liquid, the salbutamol in there, and just slowly breathe in and out, and that can sometimes cut the asthma attack. So a lot of these things can happen. But the second part of the question was interesting as well. So if you do get chest infections, viral infections, your asthma may flare up. So during those times, it may be necessary to increase your baseline medication for asthma. So this is your controller medication. So if you're using, for example, a Symbicort inhaler, or Foster inhaler, or something similar, it doesn't really matter, something that contains inhaled corticosteroids during one of these exacerbations of your asthma, during chest infections, you may need to increase the baseline doses. But I cannot advise you for your own specific case. This is really important. And I do urge you to talk to your doctor, because you can develop what is called an asthma action plan. So basically, if you have a written action plan on what to do if your asthma gets worse, that's probably better, because you can develop that together with your doctor to know what are the steps to take when you have an asthma attack. So it will differ a little bit from person to person, but it may require that you take, for example, 2 to 4 puffs of your inhaler if you get an asthma attack. Or you might have to use, for example, a spacer during your asthma attack. Or you might need to turn on your nebulizer and give yourself the medication, the reliever medication, in that way. Also, your doctor may recommend that you take potentially some corticosteroids, some tablets. If you're having a really bad flare-up of your asthma and you're getting attacks back to back, you might need that boost of anti-inflammatory. That can be your case. It may not be recommended for other people. So, of course, from person to person, the situation is completely different. Again, if you're struggling with getting a lot of chest infections, which are bacterial in nature, so not viruses, your doctor may recommend that you have some antibiotics at home that you can start when you recognize the signs of a chest infection. So for example, increased sputum production, that's greener, darker in color, you're more breathless, you're getting a lot of asthma attacks back to back. That may be an indication that you're having a bacterial chest infection and you may need some antibiotics, but it all depends on your history. So this is what I'm trying to say to you through these videos. It all differs from person to person. Not everyone's asthma will be managed in the same way. But to come back and just conclude the video about the pulse oximeter, it does give you a reading of your oxygen peripheral saturation. So your blood's peripheral oxygen saturation, SpO2, so that's one of the values. In most cases, even in quite severe asthma attacks when you're feeling unwell, the oxygen levels may remain normal, especially if you're at home. But if they do dip, say in the low 90s or below 90%, it's an indication that you would need emergency treatment because that asthma attack is not going the right way. Another thing would be that your breathing is very, very shallow. So if you're having low oxygen levels and your breathing is really, really shallow, your chest is no longer wheezing. That's an indication that maybe the attack is not actually ending, but it's becoming really severe. So you may need to take medication in a different way, either through a nebulizer or things like that. The other reading on the pulse oximeter obviously tells you your pulse rate. Now your pulse rate is not that useful, to be honest, because it will be high regardless of the situation in an asthma attack, because it will go up because of the fact that you are panicking due to your breathing and also potentially your oxygen going low. But I think it's mostly the panic and feeling unwell. So I jumped a bit in this video because, to be honest, using a pulse oximeter can be complicated, especially if you're not medically trained, you don't know exactly what the numbers mean in your case. To be honest, I would go more based on your symptoms and how you're feeling during an asthma attack. If you feel it's improving, fine. If you feel it's getting worse, you're not getting better, you're getting attack after attack after attack, you might need some help. So hopefully this was a good insight into how I would think about using a pulse oximeter to monitor asthma. I wouldn't necessarily use it every day, especially if your oxygen levels are normal, so you have maybe 94% and above on your SpO2 levels. I would probably, using the pulse oximeter daily, if you're like that and if you're feeling well, it doesn't really add much. It's just an extra thing that you're doing, and sometimes just looking at the values and over analyzing the values can actually make you anxious. So it's one of those things. You need to kind of try to strike a balance between using all kinds of devices to monitor your health and actually how you're feeling. I would go with the latter, to be honest. Just having an idea of how you're feeling, how you're responding to things, being aware, self-aware of your body is probably more important than just using a lot of gadgets, which can actually sometimes give you misleading information. Or in the case of pulse oximeters, let me just give you an example before I conclude. And again, apologies for jumping a little bit, but with a pulse oximeter, so when you put it on the first time, you need to leave it on for a bit. It must be on a finger that potentially doesn't have any nail polish. So if you're having any nail polish, you might want to wipe that off because you may get wrong readings. If you're not seeing a good pulse bouncing on the pulse oximeter, you will have an indicator either in the form of a line that goes up and down with the pulse, or some indicator just like one of these musical equalizers that goes up and down, up and down, up and down with the pulse. If you're not getting a regular value, a regular indication that your pulse is going up and down, it might be really tricky to get a good value. So I would put the oximeter on, leave it on for a bit. Don't try to bend your finger with the oximeter on, just let it hang loose. Leave it for a couple of seconds, and that's probably the accurate value that you're getting. But don't obsess over the numbers. This is what I would say. Go with what you're feeling. Hopefully that helps. Try to talk to your doctor for further information in your case. But this is just a bit of a comment on the question about pulse oximeters and monitoring asthma. Hope this is helpful. All the best.